mentioned it in the letter to the shul before Shabbos, but it was very interesting. I was on an email thread with some people who have very fond memories of Rav Anemer. Some of them no longer live in the community, and unprompted by anything else, the person just wrote how every time in the community that he currently lives, so every time obviously many of us have been saying Tehillim after davening for a number of weeks. Uh, every time his minion says Tehillim after davening, he thinks of Rabbi Anemer, because one of the things that Rabbi Anemer spoke so passionately about the power of the power of Tehillim. Rabbi Anemer clearly was a person who felt the tsaros of Klal Yisrael, and it was very disturbing to Rav Anemer that people are davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there should be salvation in Klal Yisrael. And as the person who wrote, the image that he always got from Rabbi Anemer is, we're beseeching Hashem to help these people, but I got to run, God. So please just help them out, that I've just got to run. And the idea of saying Tehillim with focus. So Baruch Hashem, there are ceasefires right now, but everything should be well for Jews all over, but certainly in Israel. We'll say Kuf Chaf Aleph 121. Shalamalos Esoinayel Hearim Meyayin Yavo Esri Esvi Meyim Adonai Yosei Shamayim Va'odetz Yitain Lamot Raglecha Al Yanom Shomerecha Hine Lo Yanom V'Lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Tzilcha, Yad Yaminecha, Yomam Hashemesh Lo Yakeka, V'Yareach Baloila, Adonai Yishmorcha Mikol Ra, Yishmor Es Nafshecha, Adonai Yishmor Tzeischa Uvoecha, Me'ata V'Yad Olam. Achinu kol beis Yisrael anasunim batzar v'shivya ha'omdim bein bayam u'bein bayabasha hamakom yirachim aleihem v'yotziei mitzara levacha me'afela liora mishibud legiyula hashta bagolav zman kariv v'nomar amen. As we normally do. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Wrong thing. Apologize. As we normally do, we'll take a moment to learn some Mishnayos spelling. We'll take a moment to learn some Mishnayos spelling out Rav Anemer's first name, Anemer's name, starting with a Mishnah in Maseches Peah, Gimel. Gadish shelo lukat tachta. We know there's a Torah mitzvah of leket. Leket is that when a person is gathering crops in the field, if there are any crops that they drop along the way, small amounts of crops that they drop along the way, they're supposed to leave it for the poor. So imagine the following situation. A person has a pile of grain, and they decide they're going to pile the grain over the leket. So it's supposed to be that the poor people are supposed to come in and be able to collect the leket. And what this person did, intentional, unintentional, either way, but what this person did is they took this great pile of their own grain and piled it smack dab on top of the leket. So a poor person who comes in to get the leket doesn't even see the leket, doesn't even have access to the leket. So that was of great concern to the Rabbanan, so they created a very interesting halacha. Kol hanogea ba'aretz harihu shalaniyim. Any of the grains that touch the ground, that touch the earth, any of the grains belonging to the landowner that touch the earth is free game for the poor. In other words, this was going to be a way that would ensure that the poor would get some grain, whether or not they actually ever make it to the leket, but it would certainly also be a deterrent from a person creating such a pile. On the other hand, haruach shepizras hamarim. Let's say the person piled grain not over the leket, but there was a wind that came and it moved the grain, the person's own grain, and moved things around, and the leket got moved around, and it's very unclear what's what. So Om Dimosa Kamo Leketi Ruya Lasos Venosin Lanium. So the Tanakhama says we make an assessment. Presumably, the assessment is based on the space of land and the weather conditions and all different types of things. And whatever would be the logical amount of leket, there had been leket here, but now everything is mixed up. Whatever was the logical amount of leket, the person didn't do anything wrong. The landowner didn't do anything wrong. So we tell him the logical amount of leket, that's what you should give to the poor now. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer nosin laniyim b'chtei nefila. Rav Shimon Gamliel actually says it's a more set equation having to do with the space of the land. And there's a very set equation. I won't take the time to go into that now. But it's more or less, he also says you figure out how much leket should go to the aniyim, but it's less of a complicated calculation. That's his position. Next, Mishnah from Zvachim, Dalid, Dam Chatos, Shenitas al Habeged. So blood from the Korban Chatos, the Kohen is certainly involved in various things in his avoda, and he's bringing the Korban Chatos, the sin offering. And the blood from the korban that now spritzes on the Kohen's garment, harizet ta'un kibus. The Kohen needs to specially wash his garment after he's done, because there's an absorption of a sacred item on his garment now, the blood from the korban chatas. It's very interesting. The pasuk in the Torah that tells us that if there's any absorption from the korban chatos onto the garments of the Kohen, he has to wash it. The context of that pasuk has to do with meat that you would be eating. Shenemar b'makom kadosh te'achel. Even though the context of the pasuk has to do with meat that you would be eating, still all aspects of the korban chatos, if they become absorbed on the garment of the Kohen, he needs to wash it, clean it appropriately. This would be the halacha, regardless of the type of korban chatas we're talking about, whether it be a korban chatas from the outer area, which is eaten, whether it be a korban chatas from the inner area. Shenemar Toras hachatos. When the Torah talks about this, it says the laws of the korban chatas, even though there's more than there are nuances within the world of chatos. We learn Torah achas l'chol chatos. There's one set of halachos for all the different types of korban chatos in terms of, among other things, if aspects of the korban chatos, parts of the korban chatos, stain the garment of the Kohen. Okay, next Mishnah, a Mishnah from Maseches Maser Sheni Lamed. Lo yomar adam lachaveiro hal esaperos ha'elu Yerushalayim l'chalik. So we know that Maser Sheni would be in certain years in the Shemitah cycle, a person would take a tenth of the crops and bring it to Yerushalayim, not to give to the Levi, but for themselves to eat in Yerushalayim. They could share that food in Yerushalayim with others as well. So I have a technical issue. I plan on going to Yerushalayim. I want to take my Maser Sheni to Yerushalayim. It's a little bit difficult for me to transport all the Maser Sheni to Yerushalayim, but I have a friend who has a good transport vehicle. So I say to him, do me a favor. Why don't you transport my Maser Sheni to Yerushalayim? And I'll give you, in exchange for your efforts, I'll give you a portion of my Maser Sheni once you get to Yerushalayim, and we'll both be able to eat from the Maser Sheni. That is prohibited to do. Why? Because essentially I'm using the Maser Sheni as payment. I'm saying to the person, if you take my Maser Sheni for me to Yerushalayim, I'll give you a portion as payment. I'm not allowed to use Maser Sheni to pay debts. Ela Omer Lo, rather, what I should say to the person is, Halem, do me a favor, do me a kindness, bring my Maser Sheni for me to Yerushalayim, Shenoch Leim V'nishtem Yerushalayim, and then we'll enjoy the Maser Sheni together in Yerushalayim. In other words, I'm not going to give it to you as compensation. I'm not allowed to use Maser Sheni as compensation. I am allowed to share Maser Sheni with you. So I should just say, if you don't mind bringing it for me, and then I'd be honored to have you over for lunch one of the days, and then we'll eat the food together. Because the halacha is I am allowed to share my Maser Sheni with other people, so there's no problem with that. If I can just say for a moment before we go on, both the first Mishnah and the third Mishnah have to do with responsibility. The first Mishnah has to do with responsibility of the balabayas, of the landowner, to make sure There's appropriate leket for aniyim, for the poor. The third Mishnah has to do with his responsibility to make sure he does have an obligation to bring the Maaser Shein to Yerushalayim. That's not God's problem. That's his problem. I don't want to take too much time now, but if there's one thing that so many of us learned from Rabbeinu Zichrono Livracha, it was a sense of achrayus. He modeled it in the greatest of ways, a sense of responsibility to other people, a sense of responsibility to community, and indeed a sense of responsibility to ourselves to bring out the best of ourselves. I just want to point out that both of these Mishnayos, in my mind at least, evoke that. Okay, next, Yud. Yom Kippurim asur ba'achila uv'shtia uv'rechitza uv'sicha uv'ne'ilas hasandal uv'tashmish hamita. The famous prohibitions of Yom Kippur. We're not allowed to eat or drink. We're not allowed to bathe. We're not allowed to anoint in oils. We're not allowed to wear leather shoes. We're not allowed to have marital relations. Va'melech va'kalo yirchatzu es pneihem. There was an allowance, according to Rabbi Eliezer, there was an allowance for the king to wash his face, even though bathing is prohibited on Yom Kippur. The king had to present himself a certain way at all times. A kala, a woman within 30 days of getting married, there was an allowance for them to wash their faces. V'achaya tinulas asandal, and a woman who had just recently given birth was allowed to wear leather sandals, so that she shouldn't be impacted by the cold of affecting her feet. Rabbi Eliezer is saying there are certain unique exceptions to the basic rules of Yom Kippur, the basic prohibitions of Yom Kippur. And the Chachamim prohibited these exceptions. Final Mishnah, hey, Mishnah from Brachos. Korev Torah v'gias zman mikra. A person will happen to be reading psukim from the Torah, and they had not yet fulfilled the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema that morning, and the time for Kriyas Shema has come, and they find themselves reading the psukim of Kriyas Shema, but not reading the psukim of Kriyas Shema as part of davening, or even as part of the mitzvah of Kriyas Shema, but rather just going through psukim. Im kivein libo, if the person, there's a machlokas how to understand this mission, either the person had in mind they were doing the mitzvah of Shema now, or a person just had in mind to read them accurately, read the psukim accurately, depends what you hold about a broader question. Yatsa, you fulfilled the mitzvah. V'im lav lo yatsa. And if not, a person would not fulfill the mitzvah. But prakim, if you're in between sections of Kriyas Shema, if you're in between the first and second paragraph of Shema, second and third paragraph of Shema, etc., shoel mebnei hakavod umeshiv. If there was a person that you need to show honor for, a person that halachically you're in a relationship that you need to show honor for, you may initiate a greeting to the person if it's between sections of Shema, and certainly if such a person greeted you, you may return a greeting. Uve'emtza, if you're in the middle of one of the sections of Shema, shom bnei hayira umeshiv. You're not allowed to initiate a greeting to a person that you have to show honor to, but you would be allowed to initiate a greeting to a person whom, if you don't greet them, they might injure you, they might do something terrible to you. In other words, imagine a powerful person who doesn't appreciate your saying the Shema. So such a person, you could initiate a greeting to them. You could also certainly return their greeting to Vera Meir. That's the position of a mayor. Rabbi Yehuda holds be'emtza shom b'nei hayira u'meishiv b'nei hakavod. Rabbi Yehuda's position was if you're in the middle of a section, you could initiate a greeting to a person whom might injure you if you don't initiate a greeting to them. But even a person who you should be showing honor to, you may return their greeting even though it's in the middle of a section of Shema. Prakim, if you're in between sections of Shema, Shalom b'nei hakavod, you may initiate a greeting to a person to whom you need to honor, Umeishiv Shalom l'chol adam, and you may return a greeting to any person because you're in between sections of Shema. Before we move on, I just want to say that I was moved by this Mishnah. This Mishnah is all about, especially this last line in the Mishnah, reconciling my responsibilities ben adam lachavero with my interactions. I'm sorry, reconciling my responsibilities ben adam lamakom, between myself and Hashem, with my interactions with other people. And I think for all of those of us who have such fond recollections and inspiring recollections of Rav Anemer Zatzal, I think this is part of the piece, at least for me, that he was a person who was a tremendous model of Avodas Hashem, and yet he was also a person of such kindness, warmth, and understanding in his interactions with other people. This image of a person on the one hand saying Shema, Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim, and on the other hand needing to manage who needs his proper kavod and to whom it would be hurtful to not respond. In a way, I feel like this is something that Rav Anemer Zatzal managed every day, so many moments of every day. And there are too many people in this world who I think only go to one extreme or the other. And I think part of his greatness was that he really balanced both. We've picked up the practice over the last few years of asking someone to share personal recollections of their relationship with Rav Anemer. I thought it would be very meaningful for us to have the opportunity this morning to hear from Rav Shlomo Katz. Many of you know this. I really shouldn't have to give an introduction, but there are people from all over the world with us who maybe haven't been in our community for a long time. Reb Shlomo is a model of Asek B'tzorchei Tzibur, taking care of various things in the community in ways that very, very few people not only have the determination to do, but have the knowledge and ability to do. He is the person, more than anyone else by far in this community, most responsible for the current oversight and upkeep and halachic quality of our Eruv in our community, which of course was begun by Rav Anemer Zatzal, and so many times out of Yom Hazeh, Reb Shlomo relies on psakim and conversations that he had with Rav Anemer. So many of us benefit from Hamayan. He lives in White Oak, and he's a gabbai in one of the weekday binyanim in our shul. He's a past president of Southeast Hebrew Congregation. He's a Maggid Shir for a Daf Yomi in the area, some of the week for our shul's Daf Yomi. And I think in so many ways he emulates so much of what Rav Anemer modeled for each of us. And it's really my honor to ask him to share his thoughts.
Thank you very much, Rav Rosenbaum, Rishus Rav Rosenbaum, Rav Anemer, other distinguished participants. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share some personal memories from my 32-year association with Rav Anemer, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Before I turn to my own memories, I want to mention a trait of Rav Anemer's that I learned recently, left a particular impression on my oldest son, Yehuda, who was a student at Yeshiva High School and was in Rav Anemer's shir. This past January, we were privileged to welcome a new grandson who's named Gedaliah after Rav Anemer. And speaking at his son's bris, my son Yehuda did not focus on Rav Anemer's stature as a Talmid Chacham or Rav Anemer's leadership of the community, but rather what impressed Yehuda as a student in Yeshiva High School was seeing Rav Anemer bend down to pick up trash from the floor of the yeshiva. And Rav Anemer easily could have ordered a student to do the dirty work, but he did not consider it beneath himself to clean the yeshiva's floor and simultaneously teach teenagers how to care for their school, their Makom Torah. And if you know my son, you'll agree that this lesson about personal responsibility for communal institutions that he learned in part from Rav Anemer has borne long-lasting fruits from which the entire community benefits. My family moved to Kent Mill in 1977, almost a year to the day before my bar mitzvah. My first encounter with Rav Anemer was my pre-bar mitzvah interview in the study in the basement of his house on Whittington Terrace. Rav Anemer asked me what I was learning in school, made some comments about the curriculum, some of which I still remember, and then he asked me to read some of my bar mitzvah parsha. I read as I was taught, using a substitute for the proper pronunciation of Hashem's name, and I still remember the halacha Rav Anemer taught me that day, probably the first time I ever spoke to him, to practice it, and that is to practice the Torah reading using the correct pronunciation of Hashem's name. At my bar mitzvah, I got a taste of Rabbi Anemer's no-nonsense side. A week before my bar mitzvah, I discovered that there are two different customs regarding the Haftorah for my parsha, Pekudei, when the parsha would fall as they did that year. Uh, the Haftorah I had not learned was only 11 psukim, so I quickly taught it to myself. Then, when I was called up to read the Haftorah, I asked the Gabbai, I think his name was Mr. Krieger, which Haftorah to read. What do you mean? He said, and I explained. He walked over to Anemer and he came back with a response. The rabbi said to read the one you learned. I learned both, I replied. So the Gabbai returned to Rabbi Anemer for further instructions. He quickly returned and reported, the rabbi said not to be a balgaiva. I ended up reading the longer Haftarah. Fast forward to my college years, when I frequently worked as mashgiach in the shul's kitchen. The days were long, but the pay was very good for a college student. I think it was $13.50 an hour. I remember some of Rabbi Anemer's halachic rulings from those occasions, and some of them were no nonsense, cost the caterer money, but that didn't matter. But one incident in particular taught me about Rabbi Anemer's eagle eyes and how perceptive he was about people. There was a particular caterer. This person is no longer active in the kosher catering business in this area, so don't worry. But I and many others thought that this caterer was personally Shomrai mitzvahs. One Shabbos morning, Rabbi Anemer walked into the kitchen, looked around, and then said to the caterer, your customers might prefer if you don't keep a pack of cigarettes in your pants pocket on Shabbos. I would never have noticed such a thing, and certainly would never have said such a thing, but that was Rabbi Anemer. In his email to the community last Friday, Rabbi Rosenbaum wrote about Rabbi Anemer, quote, his appearance was intimidating to say the least, but once a person interacted with him on a personal level, he was so warm and kind, end quote. My family experienced the same thing. Rabbi Rosenbaum mentioned my involvement with the Eruv, but very few people remember that my father, Shlita, was one of the early leaders of the Eruv. I recall very clearly my father coming home from taking Rabbi Anemer on a tour of some part of the Eruv and reporting that, contrary to appearances, Rabbi Anemer is a really nice guy and wants to be liked. I had myself many opportunities to see Rabbi Anemer's warm, lighter side. My wedding took place in a shul in New Jersey, and when I came up to the chuppah, Rabbi Anemer asked me which way I wanted to face. I turned the question back on him, which way should I face? He answered that we were in the sanctuary, I should face Aron Kodesh. When my soon-to-be wife started to walk down the aisle, I asked Rabbi Anemer if I could turn around and look. He said no. But a few moments later, as the Kala was coming closer, Rabbi Anemer suddenly said with a big smile, now, look quickly. The Eruv was the subject of many of my interactions with Rabbi Anemer. On a number of occasions, Eruv questions came up that were hard to describe over the phone, and I would need to go to Rabbi Anemer's house on a Friday afternoon to draw him a picture. This was before we all carried cameras in our pockets. Rabbi Anemer was always available, even if it meant discussing the questions when he was wearing his bathrobe in the middle of getting ready for Shabbos, and that happened on multiple occasions. While I was still in college, my father asked me to take Rabbi Anemer to inspect a certain Eruv question. This was probably in 1984, 1985. I picked Rabbi Anemer up in the Chevy Nova that we had inherited from my grandfather. Rabbi Anemer asked me if it was my own car, and I said that it belonged to my parents, but I was the primary driver, at which point Rabbi Anemer complimented me. It's very clean for a college student's car. I also remember that he warned me about a speed trap on Dennis Avenue, telling me that he had gotten caught a few days earlier. These were not the comments of the stern, intimidating rabbi that some people have a picture of. On that note, one Tisha B'Av afternoon, I think in 1987, I got a call from an out-of-town kashrus agency asking if I could work with one of their caterers on an event in Washington. I did not know these people, so I called Rabbi Anemer. Rabbi Anemer told me that the organization was not reliable and I should stay away from them. Being completely tactless, I called the person back and said, Rabbi Anemer told me not to work with you. 10 minutes later, the phone rang in my parents' house. It was Rabbi Anemer bellowing, what did you say to them? I thought that was the end of my relationship with Rabbi Anemer, but I was wrong. He never held it against me, and we only became closer in the years that followed. Few of us are I think, on the level to judge Rabbi Anemer's stature as Talmid Chacham, but I have a few memories that can give us an inkling. The first happened in approximately 1996. Daf Yomi was learning Masachet Zvachim, which deals with the laws of the korbanos, the sacrifices. And I went over to Rav Anemer in shul with it to discuss a question that I had in the Gemara. Uh, After we had discussed the Gemara and Rav Anemer had answered my question, he commented, "The last time I learned Zvachim, I was a bacher," meaning before he was married, which was at least 40 years earlier. Toward the end of Rabbi Anemer's life, I started to attend his Wednesday night Gemara shiur in the old University Boulevard shul. One thing that struck me there was how Rabbi Klavin Zatzal sat humbly as a student at Rabbi Anemer's feet, so to speak, and the incredible mutual respect that they had for each other. But in terms of Rabbi Anemer's Torah knowledge, the following is telling. I always tried to sit near Rabbi Anemer so I could observe him closely, and I frequently noticed that when he was reading the Gemara or even Tosfos, he could not actually see the words because another Sefer, often the Sefer Nachlas Moshe, was sitting on top of his Gemara, obstructing his view of the printed text. Obviously, he knew it by heart and was just pretending to read it. In 1999, I had a lengthy trial in St. Louis and often davened Mincha and Marv at the Young Israel of St. Louis. One day before Mincha, I got into a game of Jewish geography with another attendee who was probably in his 60s. Hearing that I'm from Silver Spring, he asked if Rabbi Anemer was still alive, and he expressed surprise when I answered in the affirmative. "He must be very old," the man said. "No," I answered, "I think he's around 68. "Really?" the man replied. "When I was a kid, he was more famous than Joe DiMaggio." When I came home, I met Rabbi Anemer in the Shomrai lobby, and in the presence of other people, I repeated this story. Rabbi Anemer just smiled. After I'd gone to my seat, Rabbi Anemer came over to me and whispered, "I was a child prodigy." One incident that really demonstrated for me Rabbi Anemer's love of Torah learning. Rabbi Anemer strongly encouraged my publication of Hamayan, the Torah Spring. He read it regularly and from time to time gave me feedback. One Shabbos in 2007, it was Parshat Tazria Mitzorah, just like yesterday. Rabbi Anemer came over to me at a Kiddush and told me that that week's Hamayan had answered a question that had bothered him since 1951. He then proceeded to tell me whose house he ate at that Shabbos 56 years earlier, and how the host's 4-year-old son, who grew up to be Rav Avram Osban Zatzal, had asked this question. What struck me most, however, was that Rabbi Anemer had remembered and cared about a 4-year-old's question on the Haftorah for 5.5 decades. I don't know whether Rabbi Anemer realized what he was revealing about himself in telling me that story. I mentioned that I tried to sit next to Rabbi Anemer at his Wednesday night shiur. In reality, I tried to sit next to him at every opportunity, such as when we davened in the Beit Midrash, which is now the Sephardi shul. That way, if Rabbi Anemer had some offhand comment to make after davening, he was likely to make it to me. I also used that position to eavesdrop on many conversations between Rabbi Anemer and Rabbi Hayat Zatzal, especially concerning events in Israel. Rabbi Anemer was a true lover of the Jewish people and of Eretz Yisrael, and he was extremely disillusioned by the Oslo Accords in 1993. I remember specific comments that he made about it. He also was genuinely pained by the intifadas that followed a few years later. He made many private comments about this, but one only had to listen to his public recitation of the Tfilah L'Shlomo Medina and Shomer Yisrael on Shabbat mornings to hear his pain and his concern for our brethren in Eretz Yisrael. I also used to try to sit next to Rav Anemer whenever I attended a bris at Shomrai. Those were also opportunities to learn from him, including the time he washed my achronim using coffee. I think it had milk in it, but consult your local Orthodox rabbi before trying that at home. In many other informal settings as well, I was fortunate to learn from Rav Anemer about his approach to halacha in general, something that still influences me both in administering the Eruv and in my personal life. Without getting into details, it's well known how upset Rav Anemer was when he saw people or groups watering down halacha or halachic or hashkafic standards to, so to speak, fit the times. At the same time, perhaps contrary to the image that some people have of him, he also had no patience for rabbis who he felt were inventing new chumras, new stringencies that he thought were totally unnecessary. On more than one occasion, I heard very strong words from him on that subject. There's more to say, but hopefully I've given you an impression of the giant who I was privileged to know and learn from, and whose legacy still influences my family. Yirtzeh Hashem, our Torah learning and mitzvot should continue to be a source of merit for Rav Anemer, and he should be a continuing inspiration and evaluation for us. Yehi zichro baruch.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. I think that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those remarks. I want to take the moment to welcome the Rebbitzin. I had her. Yes. Sorry, I had to look around. We're so glad the Rebbitzin and Mrs. Kahana were able to join us this morning. It's a kavod for us to be able to be with you virtually. Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, we normally meet on Rosh Chodesh. The Yahrzeit is Rosh Chodesh. So, but it's not Rosh Chodesh. So I'm just going to say a Kel Malay at the end. Okay, we'll just say a Kel Malay. El Malay Rachamim Shochein Bamiromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei Ashchina B'malos Kedoshim Utorim Gezor Ki Amazirim Es Nishmas Moreinu Harav Gedaliah ben Zeva Kohen Sholach Liolamo Bavur Shabli Neder Nitain Stako Be'aras Koras Nishmaso Began Eden Tehimenu Chaso L'chein Balarachamim Yasti Rehu B'Seiser Knafav Liolamim V'Yitzror B'Torah Chayim Es Nishmaso Adonai Yunach Laso V'Yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar Amen. Maybe Hashem's will that I wrote in this letter that so many of us in our community should really see ourselves as spiritual children of Rav, and may everything that happens in the shul and the yeshiva and the broader community, people impacted by him who live all over the world today, whose children, grandchildren, may it all be a schus for his neshama and be a source of nachas ruach for his neshama, and Tzibara L'chaim, may the Rebbitzin continue to have much nachas from our community and from all of her family. Thank you very much. Be well, everyone. Thank you for joining us.